Got a job offer from a bootstrapped company? We'll help you weigh the pros and cons of working in one in this episode of Closing Time. Thanks for tuning into Closing Time, the show for go-to-market leaders. I'm Val Riley, head of marketing for Unbounce, Insightly, and LeadsRx. Today, I'm joined by Louie Bernstein. He is a fractional sales leader and a top voice on LinkedIn. Louie, welcome back to the show.
Val, thanks for having me. It's nice to be here again.
Well, we don't get too many repeat offenders, but we enjoyed our conversation with you so much, we decided to bring you back on another topic that I feel like you have a great deal of experience in, and that's talking about bootstrap businesses. So I'll kick us off with a definition in case anybody out there isn't familiar with what a bootstrap business is. Google defines it as unfunded, being the key word. The business was started and has grown using the founder's own resources and revenue generated from the company rather than relying on external funding like venture capital or loans. And it's estimated that 70 to 80% of businesses are bootstrapped. So let's get you involved in the conversation here. Can you talk about some of your experiences in working with bootstrap companies?
Well, I choose to work with bootstrap companies because I was one. And I started my company. I wouldn't say I didn't have investment. My parents loaned me $5,000 to start in 1986. And that was a lot of money then. And I spent probably 3/4 of it on rent and a printer and, things like that. So I would still consider myself bootstrapped. But to me, bootstrapping is an attitude. Bootstrappers are people that have an idea. They don't want anybody telling them what to do, a fault of mine. They have an idea. They want to run with it, get out of my way. I'm going forward. Whereas, VC-backed companies, you got a lot of people involved. Your options as the founder or CEO can be limited. But my experience with bootstrap founders, even if you looked at my LinkedIn profile, that's all I do. Bootstrap founders, startups to 5 million, because that's what I know. And that's what my expertise is. And the truth is, that's where my heart lies, helping people, because I know what I went through to build a business.
So I think a great structure for our conversation today would be maybe talking about some of the downsides of being hired into a bootstrap business and then maybe some of the positives. So when I think about the downsides, let's say you're a sales or marketing leader and you're being hired into a bootstrap business. I think one of the big things is you might not be fully staffed.
Yeah. Well, there kind of ties to another subject about when you hire a salesperson or a sales leader. They have to be the right fit. If you're a 7-person, 10-person company, you don't want to hire somebody from IBM. I mean, it just doesn't work. Those type of salespeople, sales leaders are used to having lots of resources and collateral and support and all these things. And they're going to come and expect that from your little company. And it doesn't work that way. Everybody in a small company, whether you're sales or support or marketing, everybody does everything. If the windows need washing, you get up and you start to do it. And I've lived that. So your expectations when you go to a bootstrap company, if you're going to do that, understand that it's not all going to be laid out for you. Things are going to be developed along the way. The good news is that you get to have a hand in doing that. Before I started my company, I went to work for a small company because I was in a big company just to learn how to run a small business, right? Try to learn on somebody else's dime. And of course, that small company was EMC, and I was employee number 56. But I got the benefit of learning that. So prepare yourself for what you're getting into is what I would suggest.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I feel like you have to be very scrappy when you're working at a bootstrap business. I think, like you were saying, you have to do what has to get done. Right. And there might not be processes around those things, and you build processes as you're going.
Right.
So as part of not being able to hire you also might not be able to spend at a rate to fuel growth.
Right.
But I think that might be like a blessing and a curse at the same time, right? Because that reckless spending that we had and maybe that growth at all costs era, it can be fun, but I think when you're being more thoughtful with your spending, it really forces you as a leader to dig deep and think more about every step you're making, because this is the founder's money. This is the profits from the business that you're spending.
Right. Well, there's that expression, you get more creative the broker you get. And it's true. You have to be careful with every penny that you spend. It's a real dichotomy. You want to grow, but you have to be careful. So you scrutinize every decision. I mean, I truly believe you can't cut your way to success, but you do have to be very careful about where you do make the investments. And sales and marketing is just one of those. Each salesperson you bring on is very important, and they do have to pay for themselves eventually, because you can't be wasting your money. I will say, though, in the smaller companies, a word of advice that I would give any of the Bootstrap founders is, before you hire your first salesperson or sales leader or manager, first of all, I suggest hiring two at first, not just one, because if one quits, you're back to where you started, and two, and you may find your next sales manager there. But before you hire them, make sure that you have your go-to-market strategy cold, your ICP cold, and that you've done it yourself. You've shown success. You've proven the go-to-market strategy. You've proven that your ICP is indeed your ICP and they've bought, and you showed it, and you started to put what you've done into the sales playbook. So now, because time is money and it's crucial, by the time you do bring on your new salespeople, you have a foundation and you've got a somewhat proven system that they could jump in and be productive quickly.
Yeah, I think also it's got this feeling of a different level of accountability when you're looking at the eyes of the founder, owner, and saying, I need to hire two salespeople, versus if you're talking about spending a VC or private equity money on hiring two salespeople. Talk about how the dynamic of that is just slightly different.
Well, to the VC, they just tell you, go off and hire, because, we got the money, we got the formula, we've done this before. And so just start hiring, and, we'll try to hire the best. And you typically go through several iterations. And, I've had my experience with that as well. I went to work early on. Well, after I sold my company, I took some time off, and then I went and worked for a couple of startups to help them along. And one of them, we did really well. For about 2.5 years, we grew it organically, no investment, I think from 17,000 to 3.5 million over a 2.5 year period or so. But the founder wanted big, wanted to grow big, wanted to be a unicorn. So he went and got some VC money. And I think we brought in about $3 or $4, $5 million bucks, and they fired him within 90 days, and he was gone. And then they fired me too, so we were all gone. And so, be careful. All I can tell you, if you're the founder and you say, "I've got this, I'm just going to go get some money," just be very careful, because you have the dynamics of growth at all costs, but you also have the perils of turning the reins over to somebody else. And back to your other thought about, the strategy. If you're a bootstrap founder, you have to have the mentality of playing the long game. It won't happen as quickly. You may get sales, but at what cost? So and the hardest thing, especially for founders, bootstrap people, including myself, is patience. I don't have patience. Most bootstrappers don't have patience because they don't have time. They have limited resources, they have limited money, but somehow you've got to develop your patience, play the long game, try to make as smart as investment as you can, build a culture, and you can end up building a real good long-term business that's yours.
So I love that you mentioned culture, because I wanted to shift gears to some of the positives about working at a bootstrap company. And I think culture just comes to mind very quickly. It feels like there's this we're all in this together attitude when you're on a team that's bootstrapped. Have you experienced that feeling? Because that's what resonates with me in the times in my life where I have worked for a bootstrap company.
Yes and no. So yes, if it's done correctly. Part of the problem is that in small companies, bootstrap companies, it starts to feel more like a club than a business. And everybody feels that they have the right to make the decision and the final decision. And it doesn't really work like that. The social culture is important. I once had my best salesperson I had to fire because she was creating so much chaos. It was killing our culture. Long story short, after she was gone, sales picked right back up and got even better. And so the effect of just one person on the culture can have a big effect. But you have to balance that with still running it like a business, where everybody stays in their lane and the final decision is made by one person. So the company as a whole can move forward.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about decision making, because that's definitely one of the benefits of working for a bootstrap company is that decision making can be very quick and direction setting because it comes from the founder and you don't have to go through an investor or a board. So it feels like the business can sometimes move a little bit faster.
Absolutely. That was really one of my impetus for going to business for myself. Early in my career, maybe my first technology sales jobs were a big computer company, 50,000 people. And I was working on a deal one time as a salesperson on a company here in Atlanta, and coming down to the finals, me and one of my competitors. And she says, I like yours better, but you're about 10% too high. Just match the price and we do it. I knew we had the flexibility. I said, no problem. She says, I'm ready to go. I went back to the office, went to my manager, said, great news. We got a deal. All we got to do is match the price and they're going to go with us. And he said to me, wonderful. Let me go talk to regional management. They'll set up a meeting with the district manager. We'll run it past finance and we'll get credit involved. I said, wait, how long is all this going to take? He goes, oh, no more than 2 or 3 weeks. I said, what are you talking about? She wants to sign today. And so there's the difference. I mean, decision making, you're a small company, go, that sounds great. Here it is. Go get the order. Whereas in a big company, I don't know what the deal is. It's not for me. It could be for some people. They could go at that pace, but it wasn't for me.
Yeah, similarly, I've been in an experience where a VC firm or a PE firm, they'll put some data on a spreadsheet and they'll say, well, if you did, X with Y, then you can do, A with Z,
Yeah.
And I think about that. And from their perspective, boy, that makes perfect sense on a spreadsheet. But in the day-to-day operations of this business, that does not make sense at all. And sometimes I would struggle to communicate that because they're not, your founder, your investor is not feet on the ground.
Yeah. Well, right. And probably the majority of them never started a business from scratch. They go by math. They go by spreadsheets, the VCs. In that one example I gave you where we took in money, I was talking to one of the investors one day and I said, well, how do you know if this is a success? And he said to me, and I never forgot this, he says, we'll invest in 10 companies. We know 7 are going to lose money, 2 are going to break even, and 1's going to hit a home run. And we don't care which one. So have at it. We'll figure it out along the way. And that's kind of that spreadsheet business plan that you're talking about. They just run the numbers. And if your number comes up, woohoo. If it doesn't, that's the way it goes.
Yeah, that distance, I think, from the everyday operation of the business sometimes, really can create some dissonance when you have funding. I remember I worked for a bootstrapped company and we were just a little bit short. We saw some contracts coming in, but they weren't going to come in for a few months. And the leadership team went to the company and said, hey, here's what's happening. We had, I think, 60 employees. And we said, hey, if anybody would be interested in volunteering to take a Fridays off for the next, 3 months and reduce your pay by 20%, that would bring our payroll down to a point where we can make it through this slow period when these other contracts are going to come in. And about 75% of the employees raised their hand and said, I will take a 20% pay cut for the next few months to keep this company going. Because the alternative was, obviously a RIF of some kind. Yep. And that spirit, I just remember feeling so like I was a part of something larger. And I just don't think you get that same feeling from a VC or PE-backed company.
Oh, no. No, you don't get that feeling because it's not there. Similar story in my consulting business during one of the 4 recessions that we went through. All of my consultants, the way we would give out jobs, consulting assignments, was based on seniority. Who'd ever been there the longest would get the job. That's how it was. I think it was the first or second recession and things got tight. I said, look, and I said to the people who've been there the longest, I said, would you be willing, even though you're up next, be willing to skip a turn or let somebody else get it so we can keep the group as a whole? And nobody had a problem with it. With a VC, in your mindset, if you're an employee, they got the money. They just put millions in this company. But they understand in a small bootstrap business, it's just not like that.
Yeah, 100%. So from final thought, if somebody has an offer as to be the head of sales at a bootstrapped company, and perhaps they've only worked at funded companies or publicly held companies up until this point, how would you advise them to deal with that job offer?
Well, before they get the job offer, they should have had their questions answered regarding resources and goals and what's expected of me. What are my list of accountabilities? What type of support will I get? And, just if it's none, it's none, but whatever it is, you should know what you're walking into. So my advice to someone having been offered that job, should have done your homework during the interview process and ask a lot of questions. It'll do 2 things. It'll clarify in your mind if you are the right candidate for the job. It's half your decision too, whether or not you want to accept it once it's offered. And then decide, if this is the kind of environment you want to be in. But you'll know on the front end, no regrets going into it on the back end.
Right. So reviewing those negatives, reviewing those positives, and then, making the best decision. Louie, thank you so much for coming back to Closing Time. Are you still doing the Sunday Starter? Is that a great place for people to get in touch with you?
That's great. I mean, I think this week will be my 174th consecutive Sunday Starter. That's a LinkedIn newsletter, and you can find it under my profile. And interestingly enough, the one that's coming up this Sunday is about resilience and resilience in business, and why if you don't have it, you're doomed, and how to get it. And hopefully it'll help one of your watchers of the podcast here.
A great topic for sure. Whether your business is bootstrapped or funded, everybody needs a little dose of resilience.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Louie. We appreciate you coming back. And thanks all of you for tuning into Closing Time. Remember, you can get this episode delivered right to your inbox if you click the link in the show notes. We will see you next week.